welcome to the 2022 International E-Assessment Awards Finalist Showcase Series, kindly sponsored by the British Council. As you're probably aware, this series is all part of the lead up to the EAA's annual International E-Assessment Conference, which takes place in London on the 21st and 22nd of June, where you'll be able to meet others from within the e-assessment community and find out more about a range of exciting and cutting-edge e-assessment projects. If you haven't had a chance to register for the conference as yet, then please do so using the link that's shown on the screen below. So this week we're going to take a slightly different approach. We're going to hear from EAA board member Graham Hudson, who caught up the other day with Patrick Craven from City and Guilds, who very kindly sponsored the Best Workplace or Talent Assessment Project category this year. Patrick is going to tell you a bit more about the category and about the finalist.
I'm very pleased to introduce you to Patrick Craven from City and Guilds. He's the Director of Policy, Strategic Partnerships and Stakeholder Engagement for the organisation. And City and Guilds have sponsored this year's award for Best Workplace or Talent Assessment Project. So welcome, Patrick. It's great to see you again, and thank you too for the sponsorship and support that City and Guilds have given us this year and in the past. And I'd hand over to you now to introduce us to the finalists.
Thank you very much, Graham, and it's great to see you as well. And thank you to the E-Assessment Association for giving us the opportunity to sponsor and continue to support the work of the awards and the positive impact that they have on the industry. And we were particularly keen to support this particular award, the Best Workplace or Talent Assessment Project. It's an area of work that we've been very interested in even before the pandemic arrived, and then it was brought into, I think, stark relief during the pandemic, and as we emerge out of the other side and face probably the tightest labour market that all of us have ever experienced, just how important it is for employers to think very differently about how they attract new talent into the workforce and how they start to think about assessing that in different ways. So it gives me great pleasure to announce the finalist in this award, a collaboration between the Civil Service and PSI Talent Management online assessment systems and their Civil Service Judgment Test, a multimedia assessment delivering some ambitious aims around inclusivity and efficiency goals for the civil service and their recruitment ambitions. Civil service, an organisation of over 400,000 employees committed to improving delivery of public services for everyone in society, and the government recruitment service within that who support the civil services recruitment needs, very keen to reflect this focus on public service inclusion and accessibility in their new online test process and wanted to see these changes implemented. The project and programme itself, extremely successful, significant volumes were achieved and also significant efficiency and cost savings in several millions of pounds over a period of under 2 years were realised by these changes in approach to engagement and a very different way of thinking about profiling the capabilities and aptitudes of applicants to encourage a much wider and more diverse application pool to apply for jobs within the civil service. A really excellent example of where the marriage between organisational need and the creativity and opportunity that technology can provide then go on to produce highly tangible and impactful outcomes for the organisation. And it's right that we should celebrate it this year with the awards.
So I'm very pleased to have the opportunity now of talking to Patrick a little bit more widely about this whole area of workplace or talent assessment project. As you know, we introduced this category 2 awards ago now, really to recognise its place in the e-assessment landscape and the importance of the use of technology-enhanced assessments in recruitment, talent recognition and management. So, Patrick, how do you see the importance of assessments of this type?
I think it's a really interesting question, Graham, and I think it's for City and Guilds, it's something that I guess is not alien to us, because a lot of our work involves both assessment of people in the workplace and those younger people looking to enter the workplace. But it's set against a backdrop of quite significant underinvestment at times of workforce development, and also let us not forget, as we emerge out of the pandemic, a very tight labour market, and therefore many employers struggling, although recruitment is on the increase, struggling to attract applicants and struggling to attract new talent. So I think in that context, two things need to happen. The first is that we absolutely need to be able to explore new ways of allowing employers to engage with workforce development and assessment. And I think technology-enabled solutions offer a tremendous opportunity for us there, and a tremendous opportunity which is kind of builds on the kind of reaction that many organizations had to switch to during the pandemic. So that pivot to much more technology-rich means of engagement. I think if there is one of the positives I would like to think that we can extract from that legacy of the pandemic is that we hold on to that increased tolerance and awareness and engagement with technology in many different forms of business activity. And this is one area that would be true for. And I think in terms of attracting new talent and understanding how we recognize talent, I think that becomes critical at a time when many organizations are having to throw their net much wider than they would have had to before. I think we need to develop a new type of dialogue and recognition around what talent is, and how you find talent and how you surface talent in different ways perhaps than traditional academic routes would allow us to identify.
No, I think you make an interesting point there. I mean, if you read around this topic, there's been some particularly work done with OECD on fusion skills and the importance of those in school, and looking to help students at an early age develop the skills of critical and creative thinking, problem solving, analysis, all those sorts of things. I mean, I think there's a much greater focus or concentration on that now. And from work that I've done also, it would seem that unless we look at upskilling people in those areas of critical thinking and creative thinking, we're going to find that the jobs of the future are not going to be supported in the way that they could, because some of these traditional roles are going to fall away with the use of technology, and also with much more transportability of jobs. We've seen through the pandemic that you don't actually have to be in an office to carry out a job in a satisfactory way. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
No, I think totally, Graham, and I think you've hit on a really important topic, which is, and as you mentioned, OECD have, and even through some of their revised PISA tests, have recognised a new strand of capability and aptitude, which is basically focused around areas of critical thinking and problem solving, etc. I think what's really important looking ahead to the future is one of the things that we did during the pandemic. We were very engaged in some work that we called skills bridge work, where we were looking at the time at a lot of sectors that had almost overnight been completely displaced, as in a workforce completely displaced. And what normally happens when you face an issue like redundancy, although not mass redundancy on the scale that it was faced with the pandemic, is you tend to look around for a profession and occupation adjacent to your technical or your academic skills, because that's what people do. But what people found was that actually their whole industry had disappeared, let alone just the company that they worked for. So they had to start to think about themselves in a very different way. And this is where I think this workplace, more sort of broader employability, whether it's critical thinking, problem solving, communication, etc., these sort of skills are more transferable skills than the deeper, more vertical technical or academic skills, which is the traditional model of education.
Yeah.
And that's why I think we need to be developing this profile for people, because when we look ahead to a future of just, I guess, a constant state of slight uncertainty with the pace of change, but also, let's be honest, longer working lives. So we may not always have the luxury of one profession as a career. Yeah. I think it's the development and recognition of these skills which is going to ensure the future sustainability and resilience of workforce and of individuals. So for me, it's a critical aspect of assessment which is relatively untapped at the moment.
Interestingly, I was at a seminar the other day, and an organization was talking that recruits particularly into the IT sector, and they don't look for people with necessarily IT backgrounds. They look for people who have the right skills. Yeah. And they put them through a program of training, 10 to 12 week training. And I think they have something like a 90% success rate of people continuing through and passing this training. They then guarantee them a job in the IT sector. So they actually take people who've not got that background, take the whole panoply of skills that are needed, train them, and then place them. And that to me is just a fantastic way of looking at it, you know, in terms of what you said just then about transferable skills, which seem to get a bit ignored or have been in the past. You know, if you're not in that sector, then we're not going to think about you because clearly you can't be any good at it, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in many ways, I think the digital sector has been it's been a catalyst for a lot of changes in a lot of different ways. I mean, because it's a relatively, let's be honest, it's a relatively infant sector anyway, in the sense of a discipline and a sector to work in. But also, you know, I think as a sector, it often doesn't, and I generalize terribly here, but it often doesn't attract the norm. You know, it attracts people who have a certain mindset, a certain capability, a certain way of doing things. And that's not always manifested through traditional computer studies education or things of that nature. And often, actually, some of the, you know, the anecdotally, some of the most successful and creative people in the sector have not come through that background. And I think another interesting reflection on that is the work that we did around the skills bridge. We did a lot of work working closely with some labour market intelligence organisations, and they will do things, traditionally they will do things like scrape various jobs boards, etc., and extract out the type of technical skills and academic skills that people are asking for. But, you know, no great surprise. If companies always ask things in that way, don't be too surprised if they always attract the same people that they've always attracted. Now, what they started to do was they started to scrape for what they termed core skills. I mean, there's many terms for these things: fusion skills, core skills, employability skills, whatever. But it started to create this kind of lexicon of terminology around capabilities that organizations were asking for, but perhaps weren't really aware that they were asking for these things. And certainly applicants weren't latching onto it. What applicants were doing was latching onto the technical, the academic, the traditional metrics that people look for to say, is this for me or not? They weren't looking for this underlying sort of language trait of core skills. So what we could do is say, well, your applicant A, you've just come from that industry, and did you know that your core skills profile looks like this? Did you also know that these industries over here tend to have a very similar core skills profile to you, but you may never have considered those industries because the other bits don't map to what you think your capabilities are. So it gives people new insights and allows them to then think. Oftentimes the technical academic skills are relatively easy to add on on top of the core skills, but actually it's the core skills that are probably going to make you more successful, more resilient within that particular discipline, because it's a better fit to you as a person than the other things you wrap around it. So I think it's a fascinating area to explore, and a lot of potential.
Yeah, I agree with you, actually. And it's an interesting concept there in relation to, assessing what skills you have and competencies. Two schools of thought, really. You look for competencies that need developing and you develop them, which is all good. But you can also look for competencies which are well developed and develop them further.
Yes.
And actually, there's a school of thought that says that latter is actually more effective. And it relates to your own core, as you say, your core competencies and probably your behavioural style preferences, which,
and build up. And it is, isn't it? I think it's a difference between a mindset that says we'll always try and fill gaps, as opposed to a mindset that says we'll build further on your natural capabilities and attributes and aptitudes. Because actually you can build further on those things, and they're not constrained by any other sort of artificial mechanisms that often exist in educational systems where you're not able to do that. I think it's an area that can be looked at and explored further. I think it's also an area that lends itself to some interesting variants on modes of assessment. You can see some modes of assessment that start to emerge, which are more about sort of scenario-based assessment, decision-making, judgments based on context, and those sorts of question and answers, which don't feel quite as much like a kind of a memory regurgitation exam, because they're not looking to do that. The memory recall aspect of it isn't important in that context. What they're trying to judge is your natural reaction to situations, and to judgments and things of that nature. So I think there's all sorts of new ways as well that we could explore. How we do assess those things.
Yeah, I'm sure we could talk about this forever, actually, because I was just reminding myself in a talk that I gave earlier on about work that ACT Next did, and I think they were certainly a finalist. I can't remember they were an award winner with the EAA on collaborative skills, and the way that they actually gone about assessing those, which was absolutely fascinating. So that type of territory. Do you think that there's wider lessons to learn for the educational landscape generally? And I suppose I'm thinking here about, what we would term our national tests, this larger volume, high scale, high stakes type thing.
I think absolutely there is. I think one of the challenges we've always faced, and I don't think we face it alone as a nation, it's a global challenge, is at times it almost feels like there's sort of tectonic plates up against each other of the mainstream education system and the transition into work, where the mainstream education system is structured in such a way that it is very subject verticals channel structured, and is therefore quite difficult to address what I would class as horizontals. So the extent to which you give space to allow to develop and, more importantly, judge the horizontals of some of these talent assessment areas, as opposed to the vertical, which is the academic discipline or the technical discipline. You can see why the education system is structured in that way, because it facilitates a kind of a whole cohort classroom based approach to education. It's more difficult to weave in, those horizontals alongside those things, and it's more difficult sometimes to develop those skills and aptitudes in tutors when they're looking to deploy. However, I think it has to learn some lessons from a way in which you can provide time and space for the horizontals. There are some interesting approaches around things like project-based education, where you can have cross-curricular disciplines which actually tease out some of these things. And dare I say, I mean, the old problem is that in the workforce where collaboration is key, in the world of assessment, collaboration is collusion, and it's cheating. It's viewed in a very different way, and it doesn't always allow you to really judge the individual when actually you're probably looking at the individual's contribution to a team output rather than something else. So they start from different places sometimes, and there's a journey to be had there, isn't there, about how we can cross over with those areas and those disciplines. But I think you do see examples. You do start to see some examples where, OECD is a classic example, and other countries where they really are starting to try and weave this almost like vertical and horizontal thread together.
Well, look, it's been really fascinating talking to you, Patrick. Thank you ever so much.
Always is, Graham. Pleasure.
And let's hope we have another opportunity to talk again soon, and look forward to seeing you too at the awards in the future. So thanks ever so much for your time. It's very much appreciated.
No problem at all, and thank you for the opportunity as well. Look forward to seeing you at the awards, and hopefully we can continue some of these conversations and keep the industry moving forward.
Thanks very much, Patrick and Graham, for that little bit there around the explanation of the category and the finalist, and also again to City and Guilds for sponsoring the category this year. Here's a quick presentation from Ali Shalfrushan from Talergy, finalists of the Best Workplace or Talent Assessment Project category this year.
Thank you for having me. So I'm going to spend this session talking about our project with the Civil Service / Cabinet Office. So sadly, it's just me who's going to be running this session. But as you'll see, as I describe the project and all the work that we did, it was very much a partnership between our organisation and the Cabinet Office. So hopefully I'll do a good attempt of trying to describe the project and some of the key themes, and hopefully some interesting things to share. So in terms of what I'm going to cover across this session, I'm going to cover what were the overarching goals, what did the Civil Service or the Cabinet Office wanted to achieve, what did we actually do to try and address those goals, what was our implementation strategy, some core innovations and kind of what we tried to achieve, and some of the outcomes of the project. So for me, this project was a very, very exciting project. So the Civil Service as a whole provides a suite of assessments and solutions which are used typically at a departmental level. Sometimes slightly different approaches are taken by different teams. But this particular project was around providing a set of assessments and solutions that could be used across the Civil Service. So as a consequence of that, there were some really big goals that were kind of drove kind of this project and what we needed to do. So one of the core goals for them were to revolutionize how they did assessment. So again, as I kind of alluded to previously, recruitment can look very different depending on which department you're working with, and there's a lot of expertise within the Civil Service, so they have lots of experts around assessment and HR which may want to take slightly different approaches. But this particular project was about providing assessment solutions to be used across the Civil Service. So for them, it was really important to ensure that this was really a step change in how they did recruitment, and also providing tools which civil servants and different departments will feel that this is a valuable toolkit that they can adopt and utilize. And as a consequence, there was kind of 4 core goals. So revolutionize, a very bold statement, but was one of the aspects of what they wanted to achieve. There was a desire to ensure that what we designed was flexible. So as I kind of alluded to again, we wanted something which worked across all of these different departments. And so we wanted a set of solutions which could be flexible to meet those needs of those different departments. We wanted it to ensure that the process was realistic and relevant to the individuals who are completing it. So we designed a multimedia assessment. So one of the core aspects of that is it needs to be realistic. It needs to kind of feel like what it's like at the Civil Service. And we also wanted the solution to be inclusive. So that was really a fundamental goal of a project and what we wanted to achieve throughout. So how do we try and address those goals? So to make sure the assessment was flexible, we had to accommodate basically an assessment which was blended. So the civil service have a competency or behaviour framework which they use across the entire civil service. And so what we needed to do was to ensure that we could measure all of those 9 core behaviours in a way which was realistic and was able to kind of assess the right things necessary for the role. We also needed to make sure that it kind of reflected what it looked like in the civil service. So we had to have representatives across 13 different diversity networks. We had 71 subject matter experts involved. We had to design multimedia tests with a range of actors. So that realism was really, really important. We also need to make it inclusive. So to achieve that, we need to get a huge diverse range of subject matter experts. And as you can imagine, designing a test which is being used across the civil service, we had to build a very, very big test. So this concluded over 513 scenarios, which are basically situational judgment test items. And within that, there was basically 3,078 actual test items within it. And that would generate around 280 interview questions. So the test itself was meant to be a realistic situational judgment test, assessing some core behaviours, but in effect was flexible enough both in the technology and in terms of its inclusiveness, which kind of led lots of design decisions as we went along. And so once we designed the test, so I think we had to deliver the test in a very short time frame. We needed to build a new technology platform to meet the requirements of flexibility and inclusiveness. But really, the key thing was also kind of engaging with a huge number of stakeholders across a range of areas, and we needed to do that quite quickly. We also needed to make sure that this was delivered in the right time frame. So we need to involve lots of stakeholders across a period of time, involved 3 core phases, and we need to also follow up with this. So once the test was actually ready and was finalized, we had to basically assess whether what we designed was effective. So we did this at 2 separate stages. We've done it in multiple stages since the original design, but it would be things such as initial adverse impact analysis with 58,000 candidates, then a follow-up analysis a year later with 170,000 other candidates, again trying to make sure the test was inclusive and fair. But we also made some additions to the test. So these are things such as providing lots of robust tools for everybody to see what it's like to complete the assessment. We provided a BSL signer on all the assessments so that everybody could access the content. And if you are interested and you want to follow the link provided below, you can see all the materials that we've provided to candidates to make sure the assessment itself was nice and easy to complete. In terms of the innovations that I alluded to, I think throughout the project, we were keen to make sure that this project delivered what the civil service needed, which was a really flexible, accessible tool. So I think talking about innovations, I think there's 3 which I would probably call out specifically, but I would probably say that everything about the design required some aspect of considering inclusion, considering accessibility, looking at issues such as does this work on screen readers, etc., but also the test content itself. So I think just to call out, I think the behavior focused assessment for me was a really big element. So that enabled users to basically pick whatever they wanted and then deliver a dynamic test, which in effect was aligned to the behaviors they wanted to measure across 4 different levels. And I think to do that, we required really, really dynamic tech, which can basically be flexible. We needed to deliver an assessment which was inclusive first. So throughout the project, we need to make sure that diversity groups were involved, that the test content that we produced was inclusive, and everything else kind of maintained what it needed to be. And then we also needed to be accessibility first. So again, we had BSL signers in all of the video content that we produced. We had the test kind of tested by the Digital Accessibility Centre, who are experts at basically testing accessibility. So they have a suite of testers who basically test content, technology and if it all works. And so throughout the project, we wanted to maintain this sort of inclusivity first, accessibility first approach, and that kind of impacted all of our decisions. So in terms of outcomes, so the assessment now has been used by over 1 million candidates. We've reduced by our decisions that we made the number of reasonable adjustments requested by 80%, and a quote looking at the resources saved by the civil service that they quoted within a 2-year period, we saved them £3.5 million in savings and resources due to the adoption of this particular approach, which for a 2-year period, we're really proud of. And I think the best sort of feedback that we got was that the test has been really positive and engaging. We've constantly evolved it and enhanced it over the years that it's been used. And I think we've built a really, really great relationship with the Cabinet Office in that time. So thank you very much for everyone for listening to me. I look forward to meeting everyone on June the 21st. Thank you for having me, and thank you for listening. Take care.
So that's it from me today. I'll be back on Thursday with information about the Best Formative Assessment project category, where I'll be talking to Paul Muir from the British Council, and we'll be hearing from all of the finalists within that category. I'd like to finish by saying a big thank you to the judges and everyone who entered into this workplace or talent assessment project category this year. Wishing you all the best luck, and thank you very much for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you next time where we'll be talking about the Best Formative Assessment Project Award category.